corporate parent, Digital Currency Group, is Genesis' largest borrower, owing almost $1.7 billion, according to Genesis, which owes itself more than $3.5 billion to its top 50 creditors. Crypto lender Genesis Global Capital's first day hearing in its Chapter 11 bankruptcy taking place at this hour. Genesis is owned by Digital Currency Group, which also owns CoinDesk. Joining us now to discuss is former SEC Enforcement Branch Chief Lisa Bragança. She's the managing partner at Bragança Law. All right, Lisa, great having you on the show as always. So Genesis's crypto lending businesses, which are Genesis Global Holdco and its subsidiaries, Genesis Asia Pacific and Genesis Global Capital, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection on Thursday. Bankruptcy hearing started 1 hour ago. What can we expect from a first hearing?
Well, what typically happens in the first day hearing is all the setting up. So when you have a bankruptcy, you have lots of people who have interests in the bankruptcy and have to be approved. They have to be able to speak to the court and speak for groups of similarly situated folks. So, for example, you have lots of unsecured creditors. How are those unsecured creditors going to communicate their position to the court? There needs to be a committee of unsecured creditors, and though that committee will be set up as part of this first day hearing. That's something that the U.S. trustee, which is the representative of the Department of Justice who participates in bankruptcy proceedings, will help to set up. So the U.S. trustee is an important participant in the first day hearings. Here, the company has done even more. Here we have Genesis, the three Genesis entities have come forward already with a plan that they're proposing. That plan still has to be considered by all of these various entities and groups of creditors who are out there, and even potentially equity holders. Sometimes in bankruptcy, there is enough of funds left over at the end after paying all of the creditors, secured, unsecured, every other kind of creditor, to make some payments to the equity holders, but that's pretty unlikely here. So that's where we are today. There's a whole lot of administrative stuff that has to happen.
To what extent might we see testimony from Digital Currency Group, the parent company of Genesis and CoinDesk, who Gemini accuses of commingling funds with Genesis?
Well, that kind of testimony could come out in a number of different ways. One is the U.S. trustee could seek to examine various individuals in connection with the bankruptcy. One of the things that's kind of unsurprising is you can't commit fraud in bankruptcy, right? That's frowned upon. So one of the ways that that the creditors and the court can learn about potential fraud or any kind of misconduct via or in connection with the bankruptcy is through examinations of key people. So it's possible that that's one way it's going to happen. Another way it could happen is we already have the SEC case filed. The SEC could call various people, whether they're at DCG or Gemini, anywhere, to give testimony on those issues. Then a case could still be brought. We have the Gemini, the Winklevi twins, talking about bringing claims against Genesis and possibly DCG arising out of that $1.1 billion note that DCG issued to Genesis to clear its debt or what it was owed. So here we have, those claims can proceed in bankruptcy. They just have to proceed under kind of the bankruptcy umbrella. The bankruptcy court has to be in charge, so they don't just kind of go off on their own.
Mm-hmm. So
those are
FTX,
a number of ways that it could come up. I'm sorry.
FTX and Three Arrows Capital, their collapse is largely precipitated this bankruptcy we're seeing in Genesis. FTX has recovered about $5 billion worth of assets, and Gemini Genesis rather, is their biggest unsecured creditor. Is there hope for recovering assets, and will that play a role in the bankruptcy hearing of Genesis?
Well, that will come up in future hearings, definitely. Right now, what Genesis is talking about is, what do we have today? How much cash do we have? How many kind of current assets, real current assets, do we have right now? What are our liabilities? Who are our biggest creditors? So those are and then they have to say, well, how would we even proceed as an entity if we were to keep doing business, which it doesn't look like they're planning on doing. They're planning on liquidating. So we have a situation here where part of those assets that Genesis has, the Genesis debtor entities, they're called, some of those assets are claims against FTX. So part of that $5 billion, Genesis is going to have its eyes on, and we're going to be playing sort of a game of moving these funds around as they're found, through the various bankruptcies.
Speaking of moving funds around, even as Genesis crypto lending business has entered bankruptcy court protection, the company's trading arm, which remained out of Chapter 11, is still moving money around on blockchains. We have a chart from Nansen showing funds moving normally last week amid the bankruptcy drama. Is the trading business completely shielded from liability?
Well, the reason that a company like DCG and all kinds of companies all over set up these separate, distinct legal entities is in order to shield them from the liability of other entities. And it's very normal. It isn't an unusual practice, and it serves a legitimate purpose. Sometimes it also serves the purpose of organizing things by taxable entities. There might be different taxation rules that apply to different entities, but primarily it's to wall off legal liability of one line of business from another line of business. And so it's reasonable here to have Genesis entities continuing to do business that were not involved or connected to the Gemini Earn program. So I don't see anything kind of nefarious about major activity going on. Now, that's just as of today. What we will learn over the course of the bankruptcy is how interconnected those various legal entities are. Sometimes you have various entities, but they're all really kind of operating as one. And what you can do then, if you're an outsider trying to collect money from one entity that is separate from the one that owes you the money, is you can pierce the corporate veil. You can basically say, look, you set up this separate legal entity, but that's a sham. You never observed the formalities that are required to have a separate legal entity, so forget it. You're all part of the same bucket, and throw everything in.
Mm-hmm. So what are the next steps following this hearing, and what are some of the lessons that can be learned?
Well, what's going to happen next is that first of all, and this is always the most important thing, the people who are administering this bankruptcy proceeding have to be approved. The companies have to appear via somebody in court. So their legal counsel has to be approved. The legal counsel has to have financial support. So there are going to be all these various motions that the court's going to have to consider fast in order to authorize the debtor to even operate in bankruptcy court, even if they're not engaged in any business activity. They have to. That's kind of a big one. I know that's not very exciting for creditors, but it's kind of important. Then the next steps are going to be, what kinds of activities are those administrators, and sometimes they're called the company itself, its own management will continue to operate the company as it's working its way through bankruptcy. That's called a debtor in possession. So those activities will all be overseen by the court, but the court's got to get up to speed on, how does this company operate? What kind of information do I have to get? How do I keep track of, where the assets are going? And so there's a lot of supervision that happens, and that happens through these administrative parties who have this duty to be completely upfront with the court. They have to disclose everything. They have to be fair and completely transparent. So that's really the process. Now, I think we're going to see also a process whereby Genesis tries to chase down, whatever assets it can find. That's got to happen fast. I don't know if Genesis, if we can expect, a wonderful find like the FTX debtors had of finding $5 billion. That was pretty unusual. But who knows? Maybe there'll be some wonderful rocks that they look under and they find, billion here, billion there. It can add up.
Well, the hearing is happening as we speak, and CoinDesk's Cheyenne Lingon is listening in. And apparently Genesis is considering, one of the options on the table is to sell itself immediately. And the judge asked what imminently means, and that could be by the end of this week. So some breaking news out there for you. All right, Lisa, we'll wrap it up there. But thank you so much for joining us. That was former SEC Enforcement Branch Chief and Bragança Law Managing Partner, Lisa Bragança.